So we started speaking last night about the connection between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, actually the days that we're in now. Somebody mentioned to me after the share how we have this practice of building the sukkah, which is brought immediately after Yom Kippur, in order to keep the inspiration, to keep moving from Yom Kippur through into Sukkot. But 4 days is a long time to wait, even already that night. But I pointed out to the person who asked me that this is actually brought in halakha twice. It's quite amazing. In the Shulchan Aruch, in the Ramah, 2 simanim, one after the other, he writes, I should explain, there are slight differences between why it's brought twice. But this idea that immediately after Yom Kippur, one begins to build the sukkah, so it's brought as part of Hilchot Yom Kippur, and it's brought as part of Hilchot Sukkot as well. Right? In Siman Taf Reish Kaf Dalet, the Ramah writes, Hamedaktekim. We have some medaktekim, so the people that are very exacting in their way. מתחילים מיד במוצאי יום כיפור בעשיית הסוכה כדי לצאת במצווה על מצווה. So they begin immediately on Motzei Yom Kippur to begin the building the sukkah, to go from one mitzvah to another. We don't want to have a break. In the next siman, Taf Reish Kaf Hey, again, the Ramah did not write it again because he thinks you forgot in between learning one siman to the next. So he says, yeah, this is the first siman in Hilchot Sukkah. It says, mitzvah letaken sukkah miyad lachar Yom Kippur. It's a mitzvah to build the sukkah immediately after Yom Kippur. The mitzvah haba liado al yachmitzen. Mitzvah that comes to you don't lose the opportunity, you don't waste it, you don't wait for it to get stale. So again, there is a slightly different halachic rationale in each of these. The first one was kedei latzeit mitzvah. The second one is mitzvah haba liado al yachmitzena. The Mishnah Berurah explains that the difference is in the first halakha, he's saying you just have to start. You just have to do something. Get the poles out, right? Whatever it is. It's the night after, let's say, Yom Kippur. He says the next day you can finish it. So the first halakha he's talking about just beginning. The next halakha he's talking about completing, building the sukkah, whatever it may be. But I think you see from here the idea that it's necessary. The sukkah and Yom Kippur, there is an intrinsic connection between the two. Both in terms of Yom Kippur is not complete if we don't have Sukkot coming after it. And Sukkot is not complete if we don't have it. It's not following. It's not part of the process of the Yamim Ra'im, etc. So that's just a little hashlamah from yesterday. Moving forward, and again, the first halakha really in Hilchot Sukkah, and this is maybe the most famous machloket that we have when it comes to Hilchot Sukkah. It's not famous until now. I'm sure it will be. But that is, of course, the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. What is the Sukkah? What are we doing in the Sukkah? What are we commemorating? Is this Zecher Le Ananei Kavod, or is it Sukkot Mamash? That is the machloket in the Gemara. Everybody agrees we are commemorating something which happened to our ancestors, Bnei Israel, in the desert, that they sat in either Sukkot, just like we have, probably not, Sukkot Yerushalayim with the poles and the cloth and whatever, different, but whatever Sukkot that they were able to build, but Sukkot Mamash. Or is it Zecher Le Ananei Kavod, to the clouds of glory, the miraculous clouds which surrounded the path in the desert? And when you think about this, so again, the opinion that says Zecher Le Ananei Kavod is at least at first glance far more easily understood. Except, there was Ananei Kavod. This was something miraculous. We're celebrating, commemorating the miracle. If it was a Sukkot Mamash, what's the big deal? What exactly is it that merits its own chag? And why would you say that it's Sukkot Mamash when you could say that it's Ananei Kavod? So if you look at the Psukim, the Torah says, "B'Sukkot Shavti et Bnei Israel." It doesn't say "B'Ananei Kavod Shavti et Bnei Israel." But B'Sukkot, so maybe looking at it from a pshat perspective, that's what I mean. Sukkot Mamash. On the other hand, like I just said, from the idea, from a philosophical perspective, maybe it seems easier, it seems more palatable, I guess, to say that it is Ananei Kavod. There's some very interesting opinions in the Mefarshim which kind of join these ideas together. The Netziv, for example, right? He says it was both. He says really there's no machlok. You're right, you're both right, you're also right, everybody's right. In other words, it says the Netziv that there was Sukkot Mamash, that within the family units, within the smaller groups of Bnei Israel, they had their own
sort of Sukkot that they sat in the desert, and surrounding that was the Ananei Kavod. Now, if you think that this is a philosophical argument, this is a hashkafic argument, so there's a halachic nafkamina which comes out of it. The Shulchan Aruch over here paskins like the opinion that says Ananei Kavod. This is the language Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Reish Kafei, just before the Ramah tells us to build the sukkah. He says, "Besukot teshvu shivat yamim." That's the pasuk in the Torah. Ki besukot hashavti et bnei Yisrael. Hem Ananei Kavod. These are not sukkot mamash. Says the Shulchan Aruch. These are Ananei Kavod. Shekifam b'hem leval yakem shara v'shemesh, which were there to protect us from the sun, from the heat, etc. And the Mishnah Berurah explains. So he has a long passage. I'll read it inside. He says the following. He says, "Ki besukot hashavti v'chuleihem Ananei Kavod. Dugma lezeh tzivanu lasot sukkot." So we have, just like we had the Ananei Kavod in the desert, as a remembrance of that dugma lezeh, we built our sukkot. Kedei shenizkor nol'otav v'nifleotav. That's why we said in the sukkah to remember the miracles and wonders. ואף על פי שיצאנו ממצרים בחודש ניסן לא ציוונו לעשות סוכות באותו הזמן. Mishnah Berurah over here is answering the implicit question which the Torah asks explicitly, and many ask explicitly, and many are probably, as they're in the kitchen getting ready, are asking this question explicitly, saying, why do we have another Chag now? Why does it have to be? Why in Tishrei? If the whole idea is that we're remembering an Ananei Kavod, we're remembering the miracles that took place from Yetziat Mitzrayim. Okay, it was for 40 years, but they could be any time. But then it should be in Nisan. So he says, why were we not commanded to build Sukkot in Nisan? Why is it now in Tishrei? So he says, this is the answer which the Torah gives. He says, "Lefishu yemot hakietz v'derach kol adam la'asot Sukkot letzer v'lo ita nikert asiyatenu shem mitzvat Hashem yitbarach." The Torah is sitting in Europe, and he says that in the days in the summer, which is Nisan, then it's a pleasant time. Then everybody would go out and build Sukkot anyway and be sitting outside in the shade, and it's pleasant to sit at that point. It wouldn't be recognizable. It wouldn't be nikar that you're sitting in the sukkah for the sake of the mitzvah. Everybody would say you're sitting in the sukkah because it's nice to sit out on the balcony. It's nice to sit in the pergola. You're not doing it for the mitzvah. ולכן ציווה אותנו שנעשה בחודש השביעי שהוא זמן הגשמים ודרך כל אדם לצאת מסוכתו לביתו. And therefore, it's in the time of Tishrei, in the 7th month, where normally the weather is not so pleasant. Certainly in Europe, the weather was not so pleasant. I was in England not last year, but before that, for 4 years in a row for Sukkot. I can tell you the weather is not so pleasant. It's never so pleasant there. But he says, therefore, the Torah where he is sitting explains that he understands that this is a time when you wouldn't go out into the sukkah unless you were commanded for it. And therefore, that's why it's at this time of year. Okay, in any event, it continues. Now, here's the nafkamina. I said, what difference does it make? Halachically, at the end of the day, if we say that it is Sukkot Mamash, or we say that it is Ananei Kavod. Why is it more than just a philosophical discussion? He says, Katvu Achronim, and this is based on the Bach. שיכוון בישיבתה שציוונו הקדוש ברוך הוא לשב בסוכה זכר ליציאת מצרים. So he says, when one sits in the sukkah, when one eats a meal and fulfills the mitzvah of yeshiva b'sukkah, mitzvot tzrichot kavanah. At least lekatchila, one has to have in mind, one has to have the intention to fulfill the mitzvah. What intention does one have to have? What should one be thinking about? So he says, first of all, you should think about the fact that shetzivanu hakadosh baruch hu leshev b'sukkah zecher l'yetziat mitzrayim. That we were commanded to sit in a sukkah, and we are fulfilling that mitzvah. But that's not enough. He says, v'gam zecher la'ananei kavod shekifan az aleinu la'agen aleinu min hashar v'hashemesh. One should have in mind as well, not just every other mitzvah. The Bach actually writes that there are 3 mitzvot that have this exception. He says every other mitzvah, when one has kavanah, what is the kavanah of fulfilling a mitzvah? The kavanah is that the act I'm about to do is to fulfill the mitzvah. I put on tefillin in the morning, I have in mind, it's not a good example, we'll come back to it, but I have in mind that I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin. I hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, I have in mind, I'm not listening to a concert, I'm listening to the shofar fulfilling the mitzvah. I say Kriyat Shema, I have in mind I'm fulfilling the mitzvah to say Kriyat Shema. I sit in the sukkah, I have in mind that I'm fulfilling the mitzvah to sit in the sukkah. That is the general kavanah we have in mitzvah. Says the Bach over here, that there are 3 mitzvot where there's an additional kavanah, an additional layer of intent which is required. Again, at least lekatchila. So the first 2, it's not our topic right now, but one is tzitzit and one is tefillin. because by each of those mitzvot, and it's the third one is going to be sukkah as well, it says the Torah says the word lama'ah. Lama'ah means in order that you will remember. So over here, by sukkah, it says in order that you remember that this is that Hashem protected you in the desert. And he says, therefore, what is involved is that kavanah of that it was zecher le'ananei hakavod. So if we were to say that it's Sukkot Mamash, well, then I don't need to have the intent that it's zecher le'ananei hakavod, because it's not zecher le'ananei hakavod. But if I say that the intent is that the sukkah is a remembrance of the clouds, therefore I have that intention as well, that it's a remembrance of those ananei hakavod, and that's what the Bach writes. That's what the Mishnah writes here. He says this is the intent that one needs to have when one sits inside the sukkah. He says all this is lekatchila. He says kol ze latzet yedei mitzvah ketikuna. This is ideal. Hadiavad yotzei kol shekiven latzet levad. But if I just had intent that I'm sitting in the sukkah to fulfill the mitzvah, I've still fulfilled the mitzvah. But I've lost out on that extra kavanah. Okay, so that is the nafkamina that comes out of this discussion. And we could take it a step further as well. We could say, as I mentioned, Sukkot Mamash, we'll have to talk about another day. Why is that specifically? What's behind that idea? What are we remembering? If there's nothing really miraculous, they built themselves booths in the desert and they sat in that. Doesn't seem to be something which necessarily warrants itself its own chag. But you'll say, okay, and ananei hakavod, this is one of the great miracles. This is something which was miraculous. We should have a chag for that. The problem is, the difficulty which many of the Mepharshim raise is this. If you say, we've already alluded to it, if you say we have a chag to remember the miracles which took place when we left Egypt, there were many miracles that took place when we left Egypt. There was splitting of the sea, there was a makot, many things which happened. And we already have a chag to commemorate the miracles which took place when we left Egypt, which is called Pesach. Right? So we already have Pesach, and that's why the Torah, and everybody asks, why Sukkot at this time of year? But maybe the question is deeper. Not only why is it at this time of year? Why is it its own separate festival? What is it? So if we say we are in general commemorating the miracles, so in general we've already commemorated. If you say no, we are commemorating a specific miracle, right? The specific miracle of the ananei hakavod. It seems to make more sense. Problem with that is there are other specific miracles that we don't commemorate. There is no chag that we have because we had man in the midbar. There's no chag that we have because to remember the fact that there was a be'er. Right? This is what the Gemara says. Gemara in Tanit says that we had three great leaders for the Jewish people: Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, and three miracles which were done in each of their merits. In the merit of Moshe, we had the man, which was food. In the merit of Miriam, we had the be'er, providing water. In the merit of Aaron, we had the ananei hakavod. So how come only Aaron, so to speak, gets a chag? What about the other two? So the Chida asked this question. Many asked this question. So some say, well, we do have every Shabbos and every Yom Tov, we have Lechem Mishnah. The reason we have Lechem Mishnah is because there was a double portion of man that fell on Shabbat. Look at whether a double portion fell before Yom Tov as well. But so therefore you see that there is a zecher to the man, and there's in that sense. Okay, that's a partial answer. Again, it's an attribute, it's an aspect which we commemorate, but it's not its own Yom Tov, it's not its own chag. Why is it that specifically this miracle, the ananei hakavod, is singled out and it has its own Yom Tov? So one of the answers was given by the Mabit. He says the following. He says, if we think of these miracles, the first two, the man and the be'er, so to speak, Hashem's hands were tied, right? We were in the desert, so to speak, of course. We're in the desert, but we need food. We didn't have food, you won't survive. You don't have water, you won't survive. So yes, it was a miracle, right? The food fell from heaven. You had the man, you had the mayim, you had the be'er, you had all that, but you couldn't live without it. It was strictly necessary. When it comes to the ananei hakavod, we're there to smooth out make it a little bit cooler, make it a little bit warmer, smooth out the journey in front of them. That's something. Could they have lived without it? Could have lived without it. It would have been harder. It would have been more difficult, but it wouldn't have been impossible. In other words, the man and the be'er are a necessity, but the ananei hakavod, in a sense, is a luxury. And when you have a relationship between two people, between two parties, you want to see when one really cares for the other. It's not about by providing the things that are strictly necessary, the things that you have to do. It's about where you go above and beyond. It's about where you go the extra mile, where you show that that chibaya tera. And in a sense, the anana kavod, which Hashem provided for us, that shows chibaya tera, that shows an extra level of maybe again what we started off with coming after Yom Kippur, and that's the simcha, and that's the idea. That is why, says the Mabit, that's why there was something extra, something special about the anana kavod specifically, that they have merit their own chag, their own Yom Tov of Sukkot. And I thought this idea really goes both ways. In a sense, we have Sukkot, we have the Anana Kavod to remember how Hashem went the extra mile for us, so to speak. So too, you find Sukkot is a chag where we do everything we can to go the extra mile. Again, maybe because it's come just after Yom Kippur, but maybe as well you find many ideas. There are many chumras when it comes to Chag Sukkot. One of them, the Mishnah talks about the fact that when one eats a meal, achilat keva, that has to be within the sukkah. Achilat arai, it can be a snack, or it doesn't have to be in the sukkah. But if a person wants to take on the chumrah, wants to say, I'm not going to eat anything, I'm not going to even drink water outside the sukkah, you can do that. We can't always take on chumrah. Sometimes you have a concept of yuhara, it seems arrogant. Over here, you're allowed to do it. And you find many times, there are tiolim and people go to different places. This year, we have a whole week of Chol HaMoed, so lots of time for tiolim. And then wherever you go, people are always looking, where's a sukkah, where can you have a meal? Even though, strictly speaking, it might be that when a person is out, the person's not at home, they're on a tiyul, right? One may be exempt from a sukkah. But we find the minhag is that generally speaking, prevalent custom, we don't rely on that. We don't rely on even ikar adin, we don't rely on leniencies. We look to those chumras. And maybe that's related to the fact that the sukkah itself, that's what it represents. The anana kavod, the sukkah was Hashem's chumrah for us, so to speak. So too, and this time, one time a year for these 8 days, coming after Yom Kippur, we try and do all we can. We try and do return the favor in kind. Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha, Omer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, L'zakot Yisrael, לפנות בעליהם תורה ומצוות, שנאמר דרך בית זמן צדקו, יגדיל תורה בידיהם.